Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. The 2023 Economic Summit will begin in 15 minutes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The Economic Summit will begin in 10 minutes. Welcome, everyone. The 2023 Economic Summit will begin in 5 minutes. Welcome to the 2023 Economic Summit, brought to you by Coldwell Banker Realty. We're glad to have you joining us from the Western region and extend a warm hello to those of you tuning in from California, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. My name is Lane Lyon. I come to you from the real estate industry. I'm a realtor and branch manager in Denver, Colorado. I also draw on my many years as a TV news reporter and frequently appear on 9 News, which is Denver's NBC affiliate. And for this program, I'm excited to be your host. We have a lot of information coming your way, so let's get started. After a roller coaster 2022, we hope to bring you an understanding of where we're headed now. From COVID concerns to a new way to work remotely, there's been a lot of changes and movement across the Western U.S. With an in-depth look at what's driving home ownership, please welcome to the stage Regional Vice President for Coldwell Banker Colorado, Tammy Miller. Hello, Tammy.
Hello, Lane.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Real estate drives the economy. For every home that is bought and sold, additional revenue is pumped into industries like home furnishings, home improvement, construction, landscaping, internet services, and the list goes on. The National Association of Realtors estimates that for every home sale, 2 jobs are created in the U.S. And each home sale contributes approximately $113,000 to the U.S. economy. And workers earn an average of just over $57,000 per home sale. If you purchased a home in Hawaii in 2021, you helped to contribute $306,000 on that one purchase to the economy in Hawaii. In fact, Hawaii took the #1 spot in the country for the highest income generated from home sales. California, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado made it in the top 10 of that list in 2021. Well, real estate moves the economy. Economic factors impact real estate. Interest rates, inflation, recession, employment, unemployment all impact home ownership. There's one more important component that affects home ownership, and that is consumer behaviors. What's driving home ownership? In 2020, the pandemic was a catalyst for dramatic changes in consumer behaviors in real estate. Location-driven decisions moved from the need to be close to work to the flexibility to work from anywhere. In 1981, the National Association of Realtors kicked off what they called the Profile of Home Buyers and Sellers. This annual survey was sent to home buyers and sellers to find out more information about what, where, when, why, and how they were purchasing homes and how important home ownership was to them at that given point. So today, I would like to highlight the 2022 Profile of Home Buyers and Sellers as presented by the National Association of Realtors. So first, let's take a look at the characteristics of home buyers. The typical first-time home buyer in 2022 was 36 years old. That's up from 33 years old last year. The repeat buyer's typical age climbed to age 59. Both of those are an all-time high. 14% of the home buyers purchased a multi-generational home to take care of aging parents, and yes, kids are moving back home. In fact, many home builders now have put into their basic inventory multi-generational floor plans. At 22%, the primary reason for purchasing a home was a desire to own their own home. For first-time home buyers, this number jumps to 62%. Yes, the American dream of home ownership is alive and well. Now let's take a look at the characteristics of homes purchased. Most recent buyers who purchased new homes, that would be new construction homes, were looking to avoid renovations, problems with plumbing, electricity, and that came in at 41%. Buyers who purchased previously owned homes were most often considering that purchase as a better price compared to new construction, and that came in at 31%. Detached single-family homes continue to be the most common home type for recent buyers at 79%, followed by mobile or manufactured homes at 8%. The median distance between a home that the recent buyer purchased compared to where they were moving from has dramatically increased to 50 miles. Let me say that again. The home that the buyer lived in prior to their new purchase, the distance between those two homes on average now is 50 miles. This is a significant increase, and the distance between 2018 and 2021 was a median of 15 miles. So again, the ability to work from home, remote learning, moving farther out is creating this median distance difference. Let's take a look at the characteristics of homes purchased. The buyers typically purchase their homes for 100% of the asking price. 28% bought for over asking price. Overall, buyers expected to live in their homes for a median of 15 years. 28% said they were never moving. The home search process. Buyers typically search for 10 weeks. In 2021, they were only searching for 8 weeks before they found their home. Again, inventory is increasing a little bit, giving those buyers the opportunity to take a little bit longer to search for their properties. Customer satisfaction. 91% of recent buyers were at least somewhat satisfied with their recent home buying purchase. I did hear another interesting stat. In about 60% of the buyers who bought a home during the pandemic don't really care for their home today. The typical home seller was age 60, up from 56 in 2021. Commonly cited reasons for selling: closer to friends and family came in at 21%, retirement at 11%, and the neighborhood becoming less desirable was also at 11%. Sellers typically lived in their home for 10 years before selling. This is an increase from 8 years in last year's report, but it reverts back to the same tenure seen in 2019 and 2020. For recent homes sold, the final sales price was a median of 100% of the final list price, the highest records since 2002. All right, so clearly, homeownership is still very important. Buyers and sellers still see it as important, the thing to do. And although behaviors have changed, I believe that real estate is really on a great track, and home ownership will always continue to be important. So now let's take a fun trip down the luxury home lane for 2022. The luxury market remains strong in 2022, and I'd like to highlight the top 5 highest selling homes in the United States in 2022. Coming in at number 5, New York City at $101 million. Seller was none other than Paul Allen from Microsoft. Coming in at the number 4 spot, 3031 and 31115 Burkell Avenue in Coconut Grove, Florida, sold for a record $106.9 million. Coming in at the number 3 spot, we're back to Los Angeles at $119 million. The buyer and seller was undisclosed at that property in Holmby Hills. And coming in at number 2, we're back at Bel Air in Los Angeles, $141 million. The buyer and seller is undisclosed, but I can tell you that this home has 21 bedrooms and 49 bathrooms. It was also dubbed as the one. Honestly, I don't know what one does with 49 bathrooms. And coming in at the number 1 spot in the United States for the highest selling home, 2000 South Ocean Boulevard in Malapan, Florida, closed at $173 million. I believe this property is on the end of that island. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and who wouldn't want to live there? I want to thank you so much for taking the time with us today. If you have any questions about your city, your town, the neighborhood that you live in, and what's happening in real estate, please reach out to your Coldwell Banker Realty professional for more information. Thanks again.
Okay, Tammy, I think we need to get an invite to one of those houses.
Absolutely.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay, thank you, Lane.
Tammy, I appreciate that. For many, our economic summit would not be complete without the perspective from our next guest. He is an internationally acclaimed economist and public speaker specializing in making economics fun, relevant, and educational. He earned a BA in economics with first-class honors from McGill University in Montreal, as well as a master's and Ph.D. in public administration from Syracuse. And if his hugely popular brief blog is not in your email every day, there are plenty of people who say it ought to be. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Dr. Elliot Eisenberg. Come on up, Elliot. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All righty. Anxious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a year since we've last gotten together. A lot's changed. There's a lot to talk about. Let's go. Let's look at the video. All right, so where do we begin? First, GDP. The first half of the year had crummy GDP. We had negative GDP growth in Q1, negative in Q2. People thought we were in a recession. We weren't. Labor market was strong. Wage growth was good. Consumer spending was strong. It was just a bunch of weird one-offs with inventory, government spending, exports that drove that story. Conversely, in Q3, we had great GDP growth, 3.2%. And in Q4, we don't know what it's going to turn out to be, but somewhere around 2-3%, solidly strong. The economy wasn't as bad as we think it was in Q1 and Q2. Similarly, the second half of the year, I don't think it's as strong as it was either. The economy is slowly, very slowly weakening. And it's being propped up by consumer spending, which has remained incredibly strong. I'm afraid it will end slowly. So I see the first term in GDP, C, household consumption, slowly coming down in 23 as we run out of money, essentially. The second term is corporate investment in plant and equipment. And it is also starting to weaken. It's been okay, it hasn't been great, but it's going to weaken. Interest rates are higher, the fear of recession is palpable. People are saying this isn't really an auspicious time to invest more in plant and equipment when we don't know what's coming down the road, and it's at best not great news. The third term is government spending. It's come way down. It's come way down. The budget deficit shrank from $3 trillion the last couple of years in 2020 and 2021 to $1 trillion in 2022 because COVID's largely over and all the money that came from the government, from Congress, from the presidency to help us overcome COVID is gone. That's great news. It's good news COVID's over. The problem is now we also have very tight fiscal monetary policy. So we have tightening monetary policy while at the same time having tight fiscal policy, pushing our economy even weaker. The last term is exports minus imports. They've gotten a little bit better of late, but they're not all that meaningful in the long run. They bounce around, but I'm not going to focus on them. Let's begin and look at the data. So this is consumer spending. It's unbelievably good. If you look at this graph, you can see the divot here of COVID, obviously. But look, take a finger, hide that divot. There are two fingers. You'd never know it was there. It went straight through because of all the stimulus, because of the low interest rates, because of the everything rally. Home prices went up, bond prices, stock prices. We had tons of money coming to us from capital gains and from the government keeping spending up. But as we discussed earlier, the government money's going to stop. As you've heard earlier, home prices, they're not going to be ripping through 23 like they were in late 2021 and early 22 because interest rates are higher. So that's stopping. So there's some flies in the ointment here. And you can see one of them right here. This is household wealth. And you can see it skyrocketed here. This is before COVID began. It's about almost 120. It falls to 110 or so, 113, just as COVID starts the first month before President Trump starts signing bills and Congress starts sending us out money and so on. But it goes from 110 trillion up to about 150 trillion, an increase of $40 trillion in 7 quarters. No wonder we could buy everything we wanted. We had tons of money, both in capital gains money and in increases in income, for savings, and so on. But now, it's coming to an end. You can see here in Q1, we lost 150 billion. In Q2, we lost 6.2 trillion. And in Q3, we lost another 50 billion or so. So we're $6.5 trillion down from where we were. We're still way up, but that's saying, hey, I'm not so sure I want to spend as much money as I did before. So people are going to start to pull back. That's number one. Number two, look at savings rates. They're friggin' almost non-existent. The last time they were this low was in 2005. And in 2005, what was going on was a credit bubble. If you were alive, you got a loan. I had a dog, the dog got credit card offers. My daughter, who was 9, was getting credit card offers. This is a different situation. What's going on here is people are saying, wow, inflation's eroding my real income. I'm going to have to dip into money I would have saved otherwise to pay regular expenses. And that's why savings rates are down at 2.3, 2.4%. This can't get a lot lower. So we're using our savings. You know, here, this is credit card use. This is student loans and auto loans, so forget about that. But look at credit cards. Here, in the housing boom, it peaks, and it takes the better part of a decade to get credit card spending back up, balances back up to where they were. But here, whoa, that was really fast, and it's going up quickly. As a percent of GDP, it's not so high. This is still affordable, don't get me wrong, but the interest rates on that balance is going up, and the trajectory is not great. It's as if households are using their balance sheets to continue to spend. That's not a recipe for success. We need to see incomes rising fast and inflation and good job growth, neither of which I suspect are in the cards based on what the Fed's going to do and how robust inflation has been, right? And here you see real incomes. They're down 3% or 4% or whatever this percentage is. It's pretty high. So regular households, the average, they're struggling. That's why they're dipping into savings, not saving so much. And the coup de grace on this one, look at this. Look at the blue area. So it peaks out up here at 2.2, 2.3 trillion bucks, whatever it is. This is extra savings that we accumulated because we had nowhere to go during COVID. We didn't lose our jobs, or we got a job back quickly. We got stimulus checks, unemployment insurance, and so on, and had nowhere to go. So we accumulate all this money, and slowly we've been running through it. And by the end of this year, it'll all be gone. So our extra savings is gone, our savings rates are low, our credit card balances are rising. This doesn't lead to a bad recession. We'll talk about that later, but I certainly see one on the horizon. Again, not bad. Don't worry. It's not like the end of the world. It's not like 07, 08 or something, or 8, 09. It's not. But it seems that these things are all pushing us in that direction. That said, there's good news too. Oil prices aren't really doing much of anything. They're pretty flat now of late. It's this sort of thing where you see a steady increase in oil prices from 20 bucks a barrel up to almost 120 over a year or two. That generates serious inflation. If oil prices just bounce around like here or bounce around like there, not terribly important. Yeah, China's opening up now, so we're likely to see more pressure on oil because increased demand. Not now, but in 6 months, we'll probably start to see it. Maybe there'll be more fracking activity. We'll see. It's unknown, but we're not going to see oil prices jump to 150 bucks a barrel. That's done. It'll stay where it is. It'll bounce up. It'll bounce down. So energy prices are good. They're not inflationary. That means transportation is also not inflationary. And you'll see it in this graph here. This is a remarkable graph. So before COVID, the cost of moving a 40-foot shipping container, corrugated metal container, between, as you see here, between Shanghai and Los Angeles, was now 1,800 bucks or whatever it was, right? Then during the worst of the supply chain problems, the price went up literally to almost $13,000. Where is it now? Pretty much back to where it started. Supply chain problems are gone. When this was peaking out, there were 110 ships off the ports of LA and Long Beach. Now they're like 2 or something. Part of it is they're more efficient at clearing. Part of it is our imports of stuff have gone way down because we already bought all the stuff we need, and so on. So prices are coming down. We are seeing deflation. There's no question. It's how broad are we seeing it? We're seeing it in energy. We're seeing it in transportation. We're seeing it in goods. We're starting to see it in food. That's all great. We're not seeing it so much in services. I'm going to get back to that conversation soon, but keep that in the back of your mind right now. So that there is clearly good news. Inflation has peaked. There is no doubt, right? Here, manufacturing, prices paid. If it gets below the blue line, prices are declining. This doesn't mean prices are going to go back to what they were pre-COVID. Forget that. It just means that right now, prices are falling. Again, deflationary. Manufacturing, that means it's a good. It's a table, it's a chair, it's a baseball mitt, it's a laptop, it's something. There is true deflation in the cost of goods right now, which is pushing down overall inflation. And you see it right here. This is from the Institute of Supply Management. They ask purchasing managers, what's going on? And they're saying prices are actually coming down. Similarly, new order. What's the demand for stuff? It's coming down too. The economy is clearly weakening. There is no doubt. It hasn't showed up yet because the labor markets are remaining strong, because firms are very, very reluctant to let go of their workers because it's so hard to get them and train them and find them and so on. So until we actually see the recession upon us, the labor market's going to remain strong. And remember, the labor market is a lagging economic indicator. So this is not, you don't want to look in the rearview mirror to make economic policy. Nonetheless, it remains at historic lows. We'll get there as well. But this is showing us that supply chain problems are going on. So does this. These are various inventory to sales ratios. I look most closely at this one, retail. This one says, if you walk into a store, are you likely to be able to find what it is you want to buy? And the answer is here, no. The answer is here, largely yes. And the reason it hasn't totally recovered up to somewhere around here, 1.4 to 1.5, is largely because of autos and the chip shortage that remains persistent in the automobile sector. Outside of that, there's not much problem. Lots of inventories out there. Stores are offering large discounts to move merchandise because they have too much inventory. And that's why they're not buying stuff from abroad, and that's partly why the shipping container costs have come down. So the cost of goods has come down. The cost of food is not going up. Energy costs are coming down. Transportation costs are coming down. This is good news. There is unequivocally good news. The economy is slowing, and that's part, the benefit that we get is that. And that's what the Fed wants, right? That said, look at overall consumer sentiment. Nothing to write home about here. This is not the all-time low. It was lower here, and it was lower over here. But this is altogether not a good number. People are unhappy because inflation is bad. Inflation's reducing their real income. They go to work, they get a 5% pay raise or a 4% pay raise, inflation 7%, and they're worse off by 3%. They're not happy. And then they go, oh, you know what? I just went, for example, to Chipotle last week, and I bought a couple of burritos and a couple of drinks, and it was $40 or something. And people go, that's crazy, right? And you either having that conversation with your friends or family, or just internally in your head, and that's making you not particularly happy. So consumers they're spending money, but they're not really happy with things because inflation's eroding their income. Similarly, manufacturing is not doing well. This is manufacturing, and if it's below 50, it's in recession. Manufacturing is now in recession. You can see it. Now, manufacturing went into recession here, and there just before COVID. It came out and then goes in because of COVID. But you can see here recession, there recession, and that didn't lead to an overall recession. So manufacturing can go into a recession without dragging the economy with it. But, we've got housing now in recession, new construction's really bad, existing sales, as you know, not good. So you add manufacturing, now and soon we add commercial construction, and you have enough sectors that are weakening, the likelihoods of recession continue to increase. We're not there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but the signs all say we're going to get there. So this is manufacturing. We saw household sentiment not so hot. This is the service sector. How is the service sector doing? And this is interesting, because up until recently and through November, service sector was doing well in the mid-50s, kind of its historic normal level. And then all of a sudden, it went below 50. This is 1 month. I'm not prepared to say the service sector's in recession, a quick recession, but I'm certainly paying close attention. Moreover, when the service sector goes into recession like it did here, that was the housing bust. And like it did here, that was COVID. Services don't go into recession nearly as much as manufacturing. When it does, it's a bigger deal. So this is worth focusing on, and somewhere I am focusing a lot of my attention. I'm hoping it's a one-off. We'll see how it goes. But we have households that aren't happy. We have manufacturers that aren't happy. Temporarily, we have service providers that aren't happy. This is small business. And you can see here, it begins to improve, and then it goes back down again. This is pretty low. If you look at the data here historically, it was low like 6-8 months ago, and that's as low as it's been in 10, 12 years, that's when we were getting out of the housing bust and the recession of 08, 09. So this is telling us that small business isn't, households aren't happy, manufacturers aren't happy, small business isn't happy, service providers are iffy at the best right now. But there's more. Look at CEOs. They're also not happy. So if you know a CEO or a CEO is a friend of yours, go out and get them drunk. And if enough of them get drunk, they'll change their attitude, the economy will get better, we'll all be fine. But kidding aside, the last time CEOs were this unhappy, that was COVID. The time before that, the housing bust. The time before that, the dot-com bust. So you get the idea. That's the S&L crisis, the recession of 1990. And that's Paul Volcker raising rates, 17, 18% what it was. So we're 5 for 5 here. Doesn't mean they're perfect. Again, they could make a mistake. But you look at the evidence here, the manufacturers, the service providers, the CEOs, households, small business, savings rates. It's all giving you get a little nervous when you look at this. That's what I'm telling you. The weight of the evidence is strongly suggestive that some kind of recession is coming, even though unemployment's low. If you look at the second term in GDP, capital expenditures, here's a good measure of it. Real in blue, nominal in black, forget the nominal. Look at the real. The real recovers quickly from COVID and then kind of conks out and now is declining. Firms don't want to invest. They don't want to invest in plants because it's expensive. With higher interest rates, the likelihood of a plant being profitable, the ROA, the ROI, the ROE, a little lower. The uncertainty of a recession coming discourages investment. Banks aren't so eager to lend, so the combination is they're laying off. They're leaning away from investing in this stuff. They're still investing in equipment, but not so much in plants. They're also investing in intellectual property even more. That's where they're investing. Less so in equipment, much less so in plants. So CapEx isn't going to help us. Investment, second term in GDP is not helping. And here, CapEx for small business, not so hot either. So the first term is very strong. Consumer spending, 69, 70% of GDP. It's terrific. But it's going to weaken for all the data reasons I said with income. The second term is starting to weaken already, right? And this is the third term, government spending. And there's weird bad luck here, purely bad luck. If we look back here, this is the dot-com bust. At the dot-com bust, President Bush, the second Bush, 43, gave us stimulus checks and they boosted the economy, and there was a mild hangover when it ended. This is the housing bust, and President Obama stimulates the economy, and then there's a mild hangover when it ends. At the time this was going on, when we saw GDP expansionary fiscal policy during one quarter, albeit, but nonetheless, up at 3% of GDP, going down over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 quarters, down to negative 1.5. That's a 4.5 percentage point change in fiscal stimulus, from 3% up to 1.5% down. I was at the time a little nervous that maybe that would tip us into recession conceivably. It didn't, we were fine. But now come forward 10, 12 years, 13 years, we go from, almost 6% stimulus in the most stimulative quarter because of COVID, but even look at the 4 percentage point number, which is the general number for 4 quarters in a row, and see that over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quarters, we go from stupendously stimulative to unbelievably contractionary. A 7 percentage point swing, twice as big as this swing. Okay, that's a lot of tightening of fiscal policy that's now also occurring at the same time that monetary policy is getting tight and the Fed's raising rates, which we're going to talk about in a couple of seconds. That's just bad luck. This is good news. COVID's over. We don't need the money. But now we also have tight monetary, tight fiscal. That's, again, more likely, their collective forces are more likely to drive the economy into a recession. Now, here's interest rate hikes. The Fed raises rates. Every time the Fed raises rates, this number goes up. Almost every time this number has gone up, it's been followed in short order by a gray bar. Those gray bars are recessionary bars. The only 3 times since 1955 that we haven't had a recession bar, is here in 64 where it's purple, 84 where it's purple, and 94 where it's purple. What's going on? What's going on, I think, is luck. In 1964, the Vietnam War was ramping up. So a small increase in interest rates could be compensated for by very expansionary fiscal policy because of the Vietnam War. In 1984, what went on here was oil prices came way down. So we had essentially a tax cut accidentally, courtesy of OPEC. So we had tight monetary policy, but essentially a tax cut in the form of lower energy prices, which compensated out and prevented a recession. And then in 1994, which we'll get back to with housing, because housing took a real hit here, but there was no overall recession. I think that one's attributable to the internet sort of ramping up. Internet comes in 90, 91, Netscape and so on. So internet's there, increases labor productivity, reduces costs. It's a good thing for the economy, and that's why we avoid a recession here. But generally speaking, of the last 13 times the central bank has raised rates, 10 times we had a recession. Would you like to go to a doctor and have them tell you the last 13 times they did this surgery, 10 times the patient died on the table? That's really not pretty good odds, right? You say, I don't want to go to surgery. So this is the likelihood, again, high of having a recession because the central bank is raising rates. The other reason I'm nervous, the reason I'm nervous is the inversion of the yield curve. Don't look at the curve yet, we're going to get there, but look at my arm. This is the yield curve. Normally, the yield curve is upward sloping. And what it tells you is the longer you borrow for, the more number of years you borrow for. Think of a home mortgage. A 30-year mortgage is now, I'm making up a number, 6.3. A 20-year mortgage is 5.8. And a 5-1 ARM is maybe 5% or 5.25. I'm making it up, but you get the idea. The longer you want to borrow for, the more you pay. So this is years, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 30. Interest rates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6%. The longer you borrow, the more you pay. But occasionally the yield curve inverts. It goes down. Now short-term money is more expensive than long-term money. So the 2-year treasury, 4.3%. A 10-year treasury, 3.5%. That's ridiculous. Short-term money is more expensive. Every time you have the inversion from the positively sloped yield curve to the negatively sloped yield curve, in this graph, the blue squiggle goes above the red bar. And every time the blue squiggle goes above the red bar, what do you get? With the exception of 66, when the Vietnam War was ramping up, you get a recession, yield curve inversions, 2 recessions, Paul Volcker, here, recession. It's friggin' 7 for 7 or 8 for 8 or whatever the numbers are here, right? CEOs aren't happy, the yield curves. This is telling you monetary policy is tight and it's probably gonna drive you into recession. It hasn't yet. The labor market has remained unbelievably and incredibly strong. But the background pressures building here are strong. It's like a boiling pot. The top is still on it, but at some point the top's going to lift. It's not going to lift all that high, but it will lift up. That's my basic baseline scenario is here. Now, some people say, well, this is the 1-year treasury minus the 10-year treasury, okay? Maybe it's the wrong one. Maybe it's the 2-year treasury versus 10-year. Powell, the head of the Fed, says no, he uses the 3-month, 18-month number. So who knows what's the right number? This graph here tells you, look, it doesn't matter. 81% of all the possible treasury pairs, so 1 month, 1 year, 1 month, 2 year, 1 month, 5 year, 1 month, 10 year, and so on for 2 years, and all the other ones, all of them, 81% are inverted. This is a small sample, it's true, but the last time we had an inversion, the last time you could get it up was 41 or 42% and not have a recession. Here you have a recession, here, and here. It's 4 for 4. Okay, it's a short sample size, I get it. But nonetheless, it too is indicative. So you've got all this data saying we're likely to have a recession. There's no guarantees, and a few investment banks are saying no. Maybe we don't. I think the key here is if a good economy is, say, a 10, and a rotten economy is a 1, if we end up having a recession, it's, say, a 4. Not really bad, because household balance sheets are pretty good going in, corporate balance sheets are not bad, the labor market's strong, it can weaken, it'll still be okay-ish. 4. If we have a soft landing and we avoid a recession, probably a 5. Not that great, because rates have gone way up, bringing back construction, bringing it into recession in manufacturing, capital expenditures, and so on. So the difference isn't, oh, wow, a recession, terrible, versus, oh, it's super, a soft landing, great, hooray. The difference isn't all that large because, it's a 4 versus a 5 or a 4 versus a 6. It's not a 1 versus a 10. That's the point. And now, when does the recession start? I think the recession is going to start earlier than this. This says 2 years from the first rate hike. First rate hike was in March of 22. This suggests the recession starts in March of 24. I think the recession starts this year. Assume at this point somewhere around mid-year. It may take 6 months to get there still because the economy is still robust. The labor market's strong and unemployment is at a 50-year record low. But I think it comes quicker because the Fed's raised rates so fast. Look at this. The rate at which the Fed rates now are already at 4.25 right now. And they're going to raise them some more. They're actually going to raise them tomorrow at the Fed meeting. That concludes at 2 p.m. tomorrow. They'll raise rates either 25 or 50 basis points. But it's going to be something like that, right? So we're going to be actually a little bit higher and on our way to somewhere around here. This is a wildly rapid rate increase. As a result, the recession will come earlier. Next question. How long will the recession last? I don't think it lasts all that long. If you look at this graph, this shows you all the recessions we've had since 1858. So before the Civil War. And this is the most important. This is the Great Depression. Since the Great Depression, recessions haven't lasted that long. There have been only 3 that have really lasted long. The Arab oil embargo, we're not having that. Paul Volcker raising rates after 15 years of very lax monetary policy and bad monetary policy. We don't have that. The Fed's a little behind the 8 ball here, but nothing like 15 years. They're 8 months or 9 months behind the 8 ball. And then here, this was the housing bust when real asset prices had to decline. Well, yeah, house prices may decline a little more, maybe 5, 6, 7% more nationally, but we're not talking 30% or 28 like it was last time. So I think this is a normal 10 or 11 month recession, maybe 12, and then we're done. So it's not that deep, it's not that long, it's a garden variety recession. Think back to 1990 or 2000 to give you a framework. Don't think of 2007, the housing bust, or 2020, the COVID craziness. That was just a few months, but really bad. Now, let's look at labor markets. Labor markets are really nuts. There's good news to report, and there's bad news to report. On the good news side, here's the good news. Total employment today is 1.2 million more than it was pre-COVID. That's great. However, had there been no COVID, over the last almost 3 years, we'd have created close to 4 million jobs. So we're something roughly about 2.5 to 3 million jobs below where we would have been had there been no COVID and had we stayed on the same trajectory. So it's good news. We're making up time, making up space here, but we're still well behind where we were. Because we don't have a lot of workers, look at the unemployment rate. We're still 3 million workers or close to 3 million workers short of where we were before COVID began. Yet the unemployment rate now is exactly the same as it was before COVID started. 3.5% there, 3.5% here, and this is the lowest unemployment rate since all the way back in the late 60s with the Vietnam War. So we're at a 55-year low or 53-year low, whatever it is, in unemployment. And the reason it's so low is because we're missing these millions of workers. Why? What happened? Well, the answer is this. The labor force participation rate collapsed during COVID the first couple months, no surprise. Then it bounces back, great news. It stumbles for a while. Then it ratchets up again, now it stumbles again. The problem is, over the last couple years, what's gone on is now more difficult demographics are here now because boomers are getting older and older. Now, this is not new, I understand that, but now this process is pretty much irreversible. If you look at the trends now, it's very unlikely we have another spurt. Possible, but the boomers now are 3 or 4 years older than they were. So now the chance of them at 67 or 68 waking up and saying, oh, I'm going to go work is pretty unlikely. So now we're stuck with a lower growth environment. This is not so great. It is what it is. Immigration would solve the problem here. There are other things we could do too, like have more children. But you get the idea. This is not an immediate, immigration is an immediate solution. We're short workers. We're so short workers that to be unemployed now you enjoy an embarrassment of riches. At the worst of the housing boom here, there were 6.5 unemployed workers per available job opening. Literally, 13 million unemployed Americans divided by 2 million jobs. It gets better. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At 1, right here, there's 1 job per person. Below here, there's actually more jobs available than there are people that are unemployed. So here at the trough, there were 1.2 jobs per person. Think of 5 people, 6 jobs. Then COVID comes, gets rid of all that. Unemployment quickly jumps up. It's 5 people per job. There were literally 22 million Americans and something like 4 million jobs available, ballpark. No jobs. A lot of unemployed, no jobs. And then it gets better, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, then we're back to where we were pre-COVID. And now we reach uncharted territories, places where no man or woman has gone before, to use Captain James T. Kirk of the Enterprise. It gets down to there. At this point here, there are 2 jobs per person. 5 million unemployed Americans, 10 million open jobs. The jobs are in different cities, different skills, I get it, but this is a measure of labor tightness that is profound. Right now it's up from 2, it's now, as you see up there, 1.75, but that's still crazy high. Powell can say, I've made some improvements, but barely any. We need to get this number way up if we're going to get wage inflation down, which is the crux of the problem in services inflation, where the problem remains. Not goods, not energy, not transportation. It's in services, being driven primarily by higher wages because the labor market's so tight. And the labor market's also tight because we don't have enough immigration going on. President Trump changed immigration policy, making it more difficult to immigrate, and President Biden decided to continue that policy. So now we have a stupid immigration policy that's utterly and completely bipartisan. Hooray, right? These doofuses in D.C., that's it, doofuses in D.C. They don't do anything useful. That's not quite true. They have gotten a lot done in the last Congress. Hopefully this Congress will again get stuff done, but certainly not in the immigration sphere. Now, because of this tight labor market and so many 2 jobs per person, what happens when the labor market's tight? People go, take this job and shove it. They listen to Johnny Paycheck every morning. They walk into the office. Lane is their boss. And they go, you know what, Lane? I'm out of here. You're not nice to me. I'm done. Amanda, you're not a nice boss to work for. I'm quitting. Because there are 2 jobs for them to find. So look at the quit rates. This is the boom of 2000, the dot-com boom. But that's the bust here. At the boom, 2.4% of the labor force quit their job every month. The next boom occurred in the housing boom. 2.2% of the labor force quit their job every month. Then we zoom forward to pre-COVID, so late 19, very early 20, 2.4% quit their job. 2.2, 2.4, 2.2, 2.4. These are tight labor markets where unemployment's low, workers feel confident, there's lots of jobs out there, and they can easily go from job A to job B. But look at the quit rates that we've experienced of late since COVID. They collapse, okay, I get that, because everyone's afraid of losing their job. But then 2.4, 2.6, 2.8, 3%. 3%? If I didn't know what the unemployment rate was, and all I saw was that graph, I'd say the unemployment rate's below 3%. Not that that number 3% is correlated with 3%, it just happens to be. But I would think with a quit rate that's that high, I would say for sure unemployment's well below 3.5, because unemployment was 3.5% here, and quit rates were 2.4. So I would think unemployment rates are even lower. It's even more favorable. And this is because of the workers that dropped out. Immigration is not good. People got COVID. People died. People have long COVID. People retired. People can't send their kids to day school because there's no daycare workers. Schools don't have full complements of teachers, so some schools are still online. You get the idea. And you lose people. They retire, and so you lose 500,000 here, 100,000 there, 50,000 there, 1 million there. It adds up. This is driving wages up. If you can get a job so easily, and there's 2 jobs per person, and quit rates, moreover, have went up from 2.6 to 2.7 in the most recent data for November, I'm sorry. The data's a month old, so we won't have that for quite a while. But this is telling us that we've got a very, very tight labor market, and it manifests itself here in wages. If you quit your job, you're going to get a nice pay raise here of roughly 8 percentage points. Not shabby. Inflation right now is 7.1 or 7, whatever it is, right? And if we look here, if you stay in your job, you get a pay raise of 5.5. It pays to quit. Moreover, if you quit, you actually get a real increase in wages every year because the 8% exceeds inflation. This number is below inflation, so you're losing money if you stay on your job. The labor market's, people quit, the labor market's tight, then people quit and get more money for quitting. That's why people quit. Right now, 2.7% of the population quits. That's 33% of the labor force each year is quitting. A third of the entire population is quitting their job. What is that leading to? It's leading to changes in hourly earnings that are too high. Now, they're coming down. This is potentially good news for the economy. Bad for workers, but good for the economy. You can see here, prior to COVID, Wage growth was roughly 3% for the couple of years before COVID. A little below, a little above, ballpark 3%. And that was commensurate with 2% inflation. Now we've got wage growth at well over 4.5%, ballpark 5% for the last while. Well above the inflation levels. You got to get it down to get overall inflation down. There's labor productivity, which helps, all right? But this is still too high, even though this isn't keeping up with inflation. So workers are losing money, and we have inflation, a particularly bad thing. We'd like to see inflation come down faster than wages. Now we're seeing it the other way around, so workers are losing money. That's making them unhappy and hurting potential spending down the road, but I digress. But this is still too high. The way to get this down is to raise unemployment. That's why we're likely to have a recession. If we don't, we'll still have an increase in unemployment, just not enough to drive GDP negative. So that's why we'll have a 5 if we avoid the recession, and 4 if we get the recession. The differences aren't all that big here, right? Now let's talk about, what's the Fed going to do in inflation? We know we have wage inflation. That's the biggest problem that we've got right now. So look at the data. This is obviously clear. We have inflation. Things have changed. Shrinkflation. You buy a box of Fruit Loops, the box is the same size, the contents is only 14 ounces, not 16. I think that this is something the CFPB should focus on, but I digress again. Now, overall inflation is an interesting story. It's a tale of two inflations, to rip off Charles Dickens. If you look at headline inflation in blue, it's clearly coming down. Great news. That's being driven by food and energy. Very important, big, good news. But if you look at core inflation, excluding food and energy, it's not coming down. That's a problem. But it gets a little worse than that. I'm going to take away the red line, which is core inflation, which excludes food and energy. I'm going to keep the blue one and replace it with service inflation. Look at the red line now. It's gone way up. This is the problem the Fed's concerned about. This rise. This number has to come down to about here for the economy to get back to 2% inflation. There's goods deflation, so we can have above 2% inflation on the service side, but we can't have it at 7% or 7.5%, what it is now. It's got to come down to 2.5% or 3% at most. This will take work. And to get this down, the cost of service inflation has to come down. And to do that, wage inflation has to come down. And to get that, unemployment's got to rise. And when unemployment rises, I'm going to go back now a bunch of slides. Look at this graph here for unemployment. This is what scares me the most. The unemployment rate. Right here. Look, every time the unemployment rate goes up, here, 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 and here, it doesn't go up a little bit. It goes. So once bad news sets in, unemployment jumps up 0.5%, whoa, we're likely to see it go up by 2%. And then you end up in a recession. This time could be different, but I'm suspect. Because once you have momentum, and momentum matters. You lose your job, you don't spend. You don't spend, your neighbor loses their job. They don't spend, and so on. Eventually Congress gets in, something happens, things change, and you get out of it, right? It's not forever. But that's the fear that's out there right now, and at least in my mind and the mind of most economists. We could still well be wrong, right? But this is a serious problem. So what's the Fed going to do? Well, it's pretty simple. They're going to keep raising rates. The market keeps hoping the Fed stopped raising rates. And every time they get that feeling, they think that Powell has pivoted. Look, Powell hasn't pivoted. Powell hasn't even stopped finishing raising rates. They're still going to go up higher. So here's the current rate, 4.375. The Fed's meeting right now. And tomorrow at 2 o'clock, the Fed's going to tell us, ta-da, they've raised rates. They've raised either a 1/4 point, 25 basis points, or 1/2 point, 50 basis points. I'm in the 50 basis point camp, but it doesn't really matter because they're going to raise rates again a month and a half later. Here in late March, they'll raise them 25 basis points higher. So this number will either be 5 1/8, or if they raise it by 1/4 point here, this number here will be 4.875, roughly 5%. The question now becomes, how long do they keep the rate at that level? It isn't just getting the rate up there. The longer it stays at that level, the more destructive it is, because firms pull back, households pull back, interest rates on credit cards are higher, on car loans are higher, our home loans are higher, and so on. So there's a deterioration effect that occurs just by keeping it at that elevated rate. At some point they lower it. I think they lower it before the year ends. but we'll see. This remains to be seen. The critical thing to follow is inflation, how fast it falls, and at least as important, how low it gets. If it doesn't fall enough, the Fed will be reluctant to lower rates or will lower them very reluctantly and slowly rather than quickly. This is an unknown. I could give you stories either way that could justify what happens, but in my gut and in my heart and in my data, I simply don't know. I'm watching it, I'll keep you informed. And one of the stressor points is this: rents. They've gone way up. They're quite expensive. This is going to change because month over month in rent increases are actually declining for the last several months. You look at 4 or 5 different providers of month over month rental prices. They are falling like home prices. Not a lot, but a little. This will work its way into this data in 4 or 5 months, and rents are a big chunk of CPI. They're like 30% of CPI, 40% of core if you exclude food and energy. So this is a big deal. Inflation will be coming down. It's coming down already. It will come down more. The question is how fast and how much. That's what's going to determine the Fed's behavior and how long they keep rates up, when they start cutting, and so on. Now, let's talk about housing. This is critically important, obviously. So the nuts and bolts of the story are as follows. We didn't build enough houses for 10, 12 years. We were vastly underbuilt. As a result of being underbuilt, there weren't enough houses for sale. As a result of that, what happened? No inventory. Inventory slowly reduced. It went from 4 million units at the very peak, NAR data last day of the month. Tammy may have mentioned some of this data before. Amanda may have mentioned some of this data earlier, Greg, whatever. But you see here 4 million. Okay, it's 1 month, I get it. I'm not trying to deceive you. You see the real data here. And at its trough here in February, March of 2022, it was 850,000. Call it 800,000 for convenience. That's a decline from the super peak to the super trough of 80%. Call it 75 to account for the 1 month, and it was a little higher than 800,000. If any industry's in and inventory falls by 75%, what's going to happen to home prices? Of course, they're going to go up. And then you had COVID. And COVID hit right here in early 2020, right about there. So inventory at the time COVID comes was already ridiculously low at somewhere around 1.5 million units. And then it falls by 50% in 2 years. From early 20 to early 22, it goes from roughly 1.5, 1.4 to 800,000. And prices go crazy because of stimulus, the everything rally, bond prices, stock prices, working from home, people moved all over the place. Right? Whoa, the Denver data was clearly reflective of Californians moving here, people who suddenly able to move back to Denver or to Denver because they always wanted to. So inventory gets ridiculously tiny, interest rates are low, and there's $40 extra trillion of money available in wealth, and there's easy borrowing money, driving prices crazy high. So you have a very fascinating graph. This is the most important graph I'm going to show you. Pay attention very closely. On the right-hand side here is months of inventory, 14 months, 12 months, 10 months. Inventory, in my mind, was always the gold standard. If it's low, prices are up. If it's high, prices go down. And that's what this shows. This upward sloping line shows that as inventory goes down from 12 to 6 to 2, prices go up from negative 1.5% a month to 0 to 2% a month, 24% a year. Normally, we live here with somewhere around 5 months of inventory, and therefore price appreciation is about 6% a year. You with me? But now what happens? Look at these triangles, these black triangles. They're off the ranch. They're not anywhere near this upward sloping line. They're way off. What's happened? Has inventory gone up much? No. Here it was, 2.8 months or 2.9, whatever. Here it's 3.2 months. So take all these black triangles and move to the left and find the inventory number. There's been very little movement in the inventory from here to there. But what happened to price? Way down. We've had declining prices here in July, August, September, and October, despite very low inventories, because the market's changed. Sellers don't want to sell, as people who've spoken earlier, again, Tammy has talked about it, and Greg and Amanda have said people are locked into their homes. They got a low mortgage at 3% or 3.5%. They're not going to go and get a house with a 6.5% mortgage. But most sellers are also subsequent buyers. So they're not selling, they're not putting their house on the market, listings are very low, demand is very low. So even with no supply, prices are declining. So you have to look at inventory, but it's a very different inventory story than it was. Just like the labor market's different because of decline in the labor force participation rate, the housing market's different because inventory is telling us something very different than it was. Because there aren't a lot of sellers on one hand, and there aren't any first-time buyers because rates are high and home prices are expensive. So the first-time buyers aren't there, and the move-up buyers aren't there. You're still going to have people who move because of job, who get married, who get divorced, who have octuplets, right? And all these other reasons. But you're not going to have just the people say, oh, I'd like to get a bigger house because I feel like it or whatever it is. They're going to shy away. This is how hot our housing market was just in March of this year. February and March, March was the hottest housing market, like in the history of housing markets. Home prices appreciated 2% that month. And the month before, 1.9. So in those 2 months, you had 4% home price appreciation in 2 months. Think of it. A $500,000 house went to $520,000 between January and March. The month of February and March, $20,000 increase on a $500,000 house. And now, whoa, 4 months in a row of declining home prices. The first time since 2012, 10 years. We went from red hot to stone cold in 6 months. Even though inventory didn't really change because rates went up, locking homeowners into their mortgage and preventing first-time buyers from buying a house. And that's what's resulted. And this is because the cost of a mortgage now is very high compared to your income. And that's saying, I'm not going to buy. I can't really rent either in many cases, but I can't buy either. And therefore, as a result, home sales, seasonally adjusted here by month, have dropped like a rock. All we're getting now is people who have to buy a house, not folks who generally want to buy a house. They will as rates come down. And rates will come down either the end of this year or early next, maybe earlier if there's a recession. And importantly, just as housing is the first sector to get hurt when rates go up, housing is the first sector to benefit when rates come down. So when the Fed says they're going to start to lower rates or they've seen inflation come down enough, the stock market goes up, the interest rates come down, and the housing market starts to improve, right? Sales go up, refi activity improves, and so on. You're first in, but you're also first out. You will be first out. But this hurts. And there may be a little bit more to go. Not a lot, I don't think. I think we're really close. You look historically here, the housing bust of 94, when the Fed raised rates a lot, it went to 3.5 million briefly. Here, the worst of the housing bust, again, 3.3 million. And these were not long-term things, and it won't be long again here because the Fed's going to lower rates and this number is going to go up. So you've got to get through the next 9, 12 months, and then things get better again. We're underbuilt, demographics are favorable, and we're not going to have 08, 09. I'll show you why in a couple of slides. Oops, I missed them. Here's mortgage purchase activity. This is mortgage purchase application. So before you buy the house, you got to get qualified for a mortgage. Here, going to a mortgage lender and saying, hey, this is a precursor. This is several months in advance. This is before the pending sale. You do this. You can see how low it is. In March of this year, in January, the blue line was the highest. By the end of the year, the dead lowest number. So we're now back in a market like 2014. But it's stuck here. It's not getting worse. I think the worst is over. We may linger at around 4 million units, maybe 3.9 or 3.8 nationally, but we're very close to the bottom because rates have gone up so quickly. That's important. Now, home builder sentiment also stinks. It's not like we're overbuilt, we're underbuilt, and the builders are saying, I'm out of here, I'm done. I'm not interested in building a house anymore. So builder sentiment collapses back here in the late 80s, we have a recession. Here's the 94 time period when nationally we didn't have a recession, but housing certainly took it on the chin. Here's the dot-com bust, sentiment falls, recession. The housing bust, sentiment falls, recession. COVID, sentiment collapses briefly, a recession. And now we have another equally large decline in sentiment. When home builder sentiment gets really high, here, there, something tends to give. because that tells you the economy is overheated and the Fed starts to raise rates. The Fed has raised rates took them a lot longer to raise rates here because they thought the inflation wasn't going to persist, and it seems to have persisted longer than they thought. But this is, again, a harbinger like the high quit rates we have now. This is another indication that our economy is overheated and we're likely to get a recession going forward. This is single-fam starts. They've come down very rapidly from already a relatively low base. Don't forget 13, 14 years ago, we were well up here, close to 2 million units. Now at the best, we were at 1.2. Now we're barely 800,000. It took quite a long time for single-fam starts to get as low as they are right now. This is a very different market. We aren't overbuilt. Builders are stopping very quickly. There's no glut of houses out there. Multifam is doing better. I think they also weaken as interest rates go up and rental prices come down, but they're generally speaking much stronger. Now, what's also making this housing market a little worse and harder is inventories of builders. This includes built homes, homes being built, and land that's been permitted but not started. And there's too much. Inventories are quite large at 8.6 months. You can see it up there. Builders want to get rid of the homes that they finished, the homes that they're finishing, and the land that they haven't even begun building on, because every month it's worth a little bit less. So there's a little bit extra supply coming on the market now because of this. And at the same time, you have investors going, I don't want to buy, because home prices are declining slightly. And as they say on Wall Street, no one wants to catch a falling knife. Buying en masse build homes for investment purposes when they're falling down in price, even a little bit, 1 or 2%, the investors go, no thank you, I'm out. So they're out. So the builders are putting a little extra homes on the market, more homes in the market. The investors are pulling back and saying, I don't want to buy as many homes as I did. That's pushing up supply, pushing down demand, and hurting overall prices. So this is not that surprising. It's very temporary because we're still underbuilt, demographics are favorable, home equity is very high, and so on. We'll get to some more data points on that soon, right? Here, demographics. The number of people, 34, where my cursor is, right there, where my finger is, right there. That's 34. That's the single biggest year of home buying. This group here is about to enter there, not enough homes. So this is a good sector to be in. There'll be huge demand, just not for the next 6 or 9 months until rates start to come down. But demographics 13 years ago was dreadful. Here it's stupendous, very different. The cost of building a home is way up. Since COVID began, the cost of inputs, not labor, but everything else, up 39, 40%, the cumulative all this, right? It's coming down, but it's still up 39%. So builders aren't building entry-level homes for sure. So there aren't enough homes. So the demand from those 33 and 34-year-olds will come back. It will be strong. There aren't enough homes, unlike 13, 14 years ago when we were vastly overbuilt and there was a credit bubble. Now there's no bubble. Look at the new home price. The median new home price, 50th percentile. It's almost $500,000. The median new home. It's very expensive. We aren't building enough homes. This is a critical long-term problem from our economy, but it's going to protect us from some sort of calamity that might possibly happen, and that happened in 07. And remember, inventory is small because sellers aren't selling. So we're not going to have a glut of inventory, a glut of overbuilding, a glut of credit. No. And there's no one to build homes. Unemployment in the construction sector, this includes commercial and public and so on, is ridiculously low. So even if builders wanted to build homes, they can't. So this problem is not going to go away in the near future. Moreover, as I've already alluded to several times, credit's really hard to get. Credit availability now put out by MBA is at 102. At the peak before COVID, it was around 200. And if we go back to the housing boom, it was 900. This is unbelievable change. This is not a credit-induced housing strength that we had in the last while. It was work from home, low interest rates, a totally understandable phenomenon. It was not something from Mars coming down and driving our housing market. There's no oversupply of housing and a glut and this. No, this is just a normal rise in interest rates hurting the housing market like it did in '94, and where housing was a collateral damage. This is not a housing recession. This is housing as collateral damage. Very different. And last but not least, what do you do if you want to get a house and you can't afford it? Tammy comes and she says to me, Elliot, I want to get a house. I don't have the money. I said, Tammy, just get a double wide. But look at the price of a double wide. it's over $160,000 for a double wide. You don't own the land, and you have no water and sewer or well and septic. If you add those things, it's going to cost easily $200,000. This is the least expensive solution to housing, to owning your own house. This is telling you that we've got a problem on our hands. We're underbuilt dramatically by millions of units. That's why we may have a problem in 2023, but come 24 and so on, things return. Rates come down, household formation improves, demand for housing goes up, demographics is favorable, not many people have lost their job, home equity is very large, unlike in 2007-8 when you could get a 110% mortgage, now you're getting a 90% mortgage. It's a very different story. The buyers have skin in the game. Let's wrap it up here quickly and show what's going on. So let's look at a bunch of states out west. There's an interesting story here. If you look at Arizona, they're doing well. Population growth, 1.3%. Nationally, population growth is 0.4%. If you look at Utah, also another performing well state at 1.2% growth. Those two states in the western region are doing really, really well, there's no doubt. Now, by contrast, other states in the west are not doing so well. Look at Oregon. This may be a one-off because last year they grew, but the most recent year they declined by 0.4%, the sixth worst performer. And of course, California, where housing costs are like $27 trillion, they continue to steadily lose population. Not a lot. I mean, losing 120,000 people here, it's only 0.3%, but you're losing population because it's just too expensive to live there. People want to move somewhere else. Washington's neither a big winner or a particularly large loser. Right? If you look at all the states here in the western region, you know, Colorado's here, they're okay, there's nothing phenomenal going on. People who've wanted to move here already have moved here. This is in-migration data. I think somebody else also talked about this data. I think it was Greg, or maybe it was Amanda, I don't remember exactly. Oregon's 25th, Washington's 19th, Colorado 17th. So they're middle to upper half, right? But the winners clearly, Utah and Arizona at number 2 and number 4. People are moving there in droves. Housing is relatively cheap, jobs are plentiful and so on. By contrast, they're moving out of California because it's very expensive. Commutes are bad, traffic is bad, weather's bad and so on, right? People like me, I moved from Maryland, right? Moved from Maryland right there to Florida, a fast-growing state as well. So that's one way of looking. And this is expensive move. This isn't college kids moving. This is people hiring a moving truck to move themselves. This is wealthier individuals and full households and so on. Another way to look at it is how's GDP doing? Well, in Colorado, GDP is good. In Utah, it's pretty good. Arizona, it's great. California is fine. Oregon and Washington. You look, generally speaking, it's the West that's doing a little bit better, in part because agriculture is strong. People are moving there, and they're also moving to the south, generally. The Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida are well prepared. There's also some good states up there, weaker in the Midwest. So that's another measure of looking at it, and the West region's doing pretty well there. Last but not least, let's look at the overall economy with, again, some focus on the western states and Colorado. Back in March, it didn't matter. Every state was doing well, with the exception of a few small states. Low population, as a result, not terribly important economically. The only big city in these 4 states is New Orleans, right? Everything else is very tiny, rural states. But look at October, look at November, the most recent data that we have. Wow, a lot of states have weakened. When this many states weaken, the likelihood of a recession coming is high. Every time you've had this many states weaken in this short a period, you've had a recession. The yield curve, consumer sentiment, CEO sentiment, manufacturing sentiment, service sentiment, home builder sentiment, all these things together give you a weight of the evidence suggesting that a recession is likely. And if we're lucky enough to avoid the recession, we'll have a soft landing, but it's not like that's going to be a heroically strong 10 economy. It'll be a 5 as opposed to a recession-induced hard landing of 4, because we go into it in pretty good shape from the data that I already showed you. I hope I've given you some food for thought. This is to wrap it up. 23 will deteriorate over time. We don't know how much it will deteriorate. Will there be a recession or not remains to be seen. But I think we're likely to get something in early Q3 would be my guess, very late Q2, June, July, August, something like that, right? The Fed's going to keep raising rates through the end of Q1. So we're going to get a rate hike tomorrow and then another rate hike in late March. We'll get 25 basis points each, a 50 basis, a half point and then a quarter, but something along those lines. We've been creating jobs steadily for a long time, but every month for the last year and a half, it's been steadily declining. It's now about 220,000, and it will continue to decline as we go forward until it hits zero, I think, somewhere, and then it goes negative at some point, right? Inflation has clearly peaked. There's no doubt. It's how fast it continues falling and how low it gets before it stops falling. That's the two most important questions that are focusing the attention of the Fed right now. Service spending has recovered. It's back on trend growth right now. It dipped but that's now no longer the issue, right? And then I want you to follow three things going forward. Professionally, look at the inventory of homes. It will give you a clue of what's going on. But remember, even if there's small increases in inventory, it can lead to price declines that you never saw before, right? So I'm hoping that we don't get increased inventory because sellers don't want to sell. That depresses total sales activity, but protects prices from declining further, right? Unemployment, it has to rise. Whether it rises 1% in the soft landing or say 2% in the recessionary outcome, that's the issue. But it's not going to go up to 10 or 11% like it did 13 or 14 years ago. This is the horse of a very different color. And last but not least, inflation is enemy number one. Watch it, because inventories and unemployment feed into inflation. And if it's too high or not falling fast enough, the Fed's going to be upset. Again, the Fed wants to see rapid declines to a very low level, and they'll be happy. They want to see trend going down fast. To get a hold of me, this is my name, cell number, phone number, Twitter handle, and email address. I put out 70-word daily commentaries on the economy, as Lane talked about earlier. I recommend you, if you want to get it, it's a great way to keep up on what's going on in economics. There are no graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, and no photos. The easiest way to get it is to text the word, you got it, bow tie. One word, bow tie, to the 5-digit number 66866. Again, 66866. I hope I've given you some food for thought, some ideas to think about, and remember, 23 will end and 24 should be meaningfully better. Lane, take it away.
Okay, Elliot, thank you. You always have a way of making us laugh, even when it's complex statistics. We're grateful for that. Thank you for being here. That will conclude this year's Economic Summit. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our speakers and sponsors. And remember to reach out to your Coldwell Banker real estate professional who likely invited you to this program if you have any additional questions. I'd also like to thank our technical team who've done a great job bringing this program to you, and of course you for tuning in online. That'll do it for us. From the History Colorado Museum in the heart of downtown Denver, I'm Lane Lyon. Thanks for watching.